Well, it seemed like quite a few of the councillors more or less were embedded with where they were going. I wasn't going to be able to change them.
I mean, we'll probably never know if this will prevent something from happening, but we can live with that. What we can't live with is something happening and knowing that we didn't take any proactive measures.
In making a decision, we need to take into account 7 years of discussion.
Welcome to This Week Uncut, where we take a look at the week's top stories from CHCO-TV and The Courier. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki, Hogarth.
We begin this week with the decision from the St. Andrews Council on sending the tender of Market Wharf and Market Square out to tender finally.
Yes, this was a packed council meeting for the special meeting on Tuesday night. Standing room only inside. Also, a lot of people waiting outside too who couldn't fit into the room. So a lot of people in town very, very much waiting this decision.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, there was a capacity issue. The council room is quite small, and so they could only fit a certain number of people in there. And so at some point, the bylaw officer had to prevent people from coming in. They locked the door. But there was a laptop available to them, and they were watching it outside the council chambers. We have photographs of that and video of that. But yeah, it was a tense room to be in on Tuesday night.
Yes, definitely a tense room. We weren't the only media there as well. I think CBC was online, CTV, Telegraph were also there. So I think from a media standpoint as well, this was very much a highly anticipated outcome that had been top of mind across southwest New Brunswick for quite some time.
Council ultimately voted 6-1, and I want to clarify that the 6-1 vote is because Councillor Daryl Weir abstained, which counts as a yes vote. I don't know if that was quite understood during that process, but that's how that works, and that's why the vote was 6-1. And essentially what happens now is it goes to tender. So what that means is construction companies with experience in building these types of infrastructure will bid on the project for a certain price. It'll be an estimate of what they think the project will be. The budget is $8 million, but we do know that one thing is for sure: if it comes in over tender, the project will not go forward.
Right, and these are prices that we know were in existence around 2023 as well, when these presentations about the different models for the wharf were presented to the community at those meetings. They did have price estimates at the time. That was part of the process too, to see which one was the most affordable, which one was the easiest to accomplish in the shortest window of time. This one seemed to fit the bill in those meetings, according to the public. However, we know from that meeting as well, it was about just over 70 people in town that voted in favor of the model that they voted to send to tender. 71
out of 191 responses to the survey, although council has been adamant that everyone in the community had an opportunity to fill this survey out. The uptake was not very high, and so it was a very small sample size of the opinions of potentially people in this community. And as Councillor Daryl Weir will say later on in the show, it holds no statistical validity because of it's such a small sample size. So it feels hard to rely on the information as fact.
Mm-hmm. And it definitely, we've talked about this on this show as well before, it has been a bit of a polarizing issue in town. People on both sides of the wharf debate, whether it should go ahead, whether it should, a new model should be considered, maybe back to the drawing board. But definitely we saw that in the room on Tuesday night as well. But we also got to talk to people that were still able to get along, even though holding opposite opinions on this.
Yeah, so the meeting actually started with a presentation from a local resident engineer, Steve Saunders, who wanted to take a look at the Gemtech study. He called it a peer-to-peer review, which is essentially someone in a similar field reviewing information provided by someone else in the field. And he took aim at sort of what was contained in that study, including the fact that it was a 2D model, not a 3D model. So he didn't feel like it was sufficient enough to model what the actual impact would be. It didn't take into consideration floating debris. And you and I both know if you go down to the wharf when the tide is in, there is debris along the edge of the shoreline. They don't believe they took enough samples to really measure longshore sediment transport. I'm learning all of these words as I do report this information, but basically sand and silt moving along, which can cause erosion. They do believe that even with those samples, that small amount, 4 samples in total, that it will kind of happen in the corners of the infill. So it wasn't impossible, but minimal is what the report said. And Steve challenged all of those things in his presentation.
And what we should mention too is I know there are new people joining regularly to this debate, to this topic, who might not know from the June meeting. It was the last meeting of former Mayor Brad Henderson when he was mayor, where they decided to go about this study after facing some concern from residents that there was environmental impact. They wanted to look closer at it before going to tender. So this was a compromise that the former mayor put forward in his last meeting is, what if we do this study, find out the impact, and then based on the results of that study, we decide to go to tender. So for anyone just joining, that was what the GemTech study, it was commissioned in June, and the results were presented the week before last, and then the 29th this past week was a decision to be made based on the results of that. And that was what Steve was making this last minute presentation regarding.
It's worth noting this compromise cost the taxpayers an additional $25,000 on top of the work already done by another engineering firm, CBCL. But we're going to take a listen to what Steve Saunders presented to council.
So I'm going to keep it as short as I can, and I'm going to try to keep the righteous indignation to a minimum. Are we ready? Good. If you don't know me already, I'm an engineer who specializes in something called CFD modeling. CFD stands for Computational Fluid Dynamics. This was just getting going in industry when I was in grad school, and I got picked up by a jet engine company for their R&D department. Funding was coming from NASA and other IRED sources. And if you know about NASA funding, it means it has to be shared throughout the industry. What this means is when you go outside tonight and you see a contrail going overhead, an engineer from little UNB had a part in the design of that plane. After Aero, I got into environmental engineering, where I've been ever since. Now, as far as the computers are concerned, is for CFD modeling, the math involved with environmental is the same as it is with Aero. And so 20 years ago, I struck off on my own, and I've been doing CFD modeling as a sub-consultant for larger consulting firms ever since then. Clients are worldwide, but I also do some work for Stantec in Fredericton and CBCL in Halifax and some local aquaculture concerns. I've embarked on several coastal engineering projects during this time. So let's get to the business at hand here. First item on the top of that slide says GemTech addressed all specs in the scope outlined in their June 12th proposal to the town. However, there are some items in their report that require closer scrutiny. Now, having said that, I want to point out that I did not come here tonight to throw mud at GemTech's research and reporting. My comments here amount to what might be considered a peer review. GemTech did what they said they would do in their proposal, and I complimented Mr. Holder on his reporting last week. An important point to raise here is earlier in this process, I asked the town for a copy of their request for quote that went to GemTech but didn't get one. All right, so it's bad form to read through a PowerPoint, and there's a lot of little writing on there. I assume you've read most of this, but my point one is I'm saying these guys did what they said they were going to do, and they did their analysis for the two-dimensional code. And I'm suggesting that something that is requiring this much detail really should be analyzed with a three-dimensional code. The 2D mesh, this is item 2, that they used cells that were as much as 10 meter on a side. That's more than 30 feet if you haven't made your conversion to metric in your head yet. That's pretty coarse when you're looking at bits of sand being moved around, floating debris and whatnot. Third, intertidal zone, where the waterfront comprises everything from muck, that's very fine silt, on up through gravel and even some shingle and exposed bedrock. So the 4 samples that they took for their sieve testing during their field visit, I believe, were insufficient as representative of the solids transport modeling. And also, number 4, their evaluation did not include behavior of floating debris. They weren't asked to, so therefore they didn't. They didn't get into the visual impact of the armor rock a groin might present, even though this really is part of the environment. All right, so let's move on to the next slide here. This is what I'm going on about as far as 2 dimensions versus 3. The picture on the left is GemTech's figure 3.2, and it shows the computational mesh that they used for the research area. And you can see what I was talking about earlier. Those triangular elements are their computational cells, and they measure about 10 feet on a side near the wharf. You can use the wharf head for scale. And then out in the middle of the harbor, they're as much as 20 or 30 feet on a side. I didn't have very long to work on it, but I made a 3D model, and you can see it there on the right. That's a plan view of it, and my cells are probably on the order of about a meter a side. And then down below there is a section close to where the end of the rock wall will be, and you can see a vertical slice of what the mesh in the Z direction would look like. GemTech's model doesn't have any mesh in the Z direction, and I'm maintaining that you need that in order to seriously replicate what current and sediment is going to do. That mesh there is AI generated, and it still needs a little bit of work, but you can see that I have multiple layers against solid surfaces like the vertical columns and the rock wall. All right, let's move on to the next slide. I ran some currents through my model, and I don't really think there's enough time to get into this. If you want, we can come back to this when you have questions. You can see the GemTech version of the whole harbor on the right, and then you can see mine on the left. This is very much a work in progress. It's 2 days of simulation, whereas it would probably take a month in order to get what's really good. One thing we can conclude from this is Vincent van Gogh was ahead of his time. All right, next slide. All right. These show the sediment sampling locations that the GemTech people took. It shows 4 locations where samples were taken for sieve testing in their lab. Now, for you folks who are unfamiliar with sieve testing, you take your sample, dry it out, and then you weigh it, and then you pour it into a top of a set of progressively finer screens. This stack is set to vibrating until the finest particles have made their way all the way down to the bottom of the set of screens. You weigh what ended up in each screen, and there you have your distribution of particle sizing. I used to do these things all the time to see what would happen when helicopters were hovering in desert environments. I feel that GenTech had been asked by the town to, if GenTech had been asked by the town to do a more rigorous survey, they would have collected their samples from more locations, particularly out at the head end of the groin and in areas where the currents would have been influenced by its presence. Movement of floating debris was not part of the scope of work accepted by the town for GemTech's June 12th proposal, so they weren't under any obligation to do this important element. This picture right here is a drone shot that's been taken in the last couple of years. You can date it by the presence of the porch outside the brew pub, but it doesn't have the little whale tableau on the front, so it's a couple, 3 years ago probably. But what's fairly obvious in this picture is you've got a mat of rotting seaweed that's in the corner, and if you look in back of where the Tall Tom operation is, there's another mat there. This is a fairly small protrusion out from the natural shoreline, but you can still see the effects that it would have. I think this is one of the concerns that a lot of people have with an armor rock wall is when there's seaweed, it's going to get lodged in the cracks. You can see that in the left, And if you look at the picture on the right, that's the yacht club. And there's a mat of rotting seaweed on the shore there. Now, when I was a sailing instructor in the 70s, the natural shoreline was all the way over to the left side of that picture. So there wasn't a big rocky thing sticking out. There was no mat of seaweed there. In fact, when we came down with our boats, there'd be people on towels who were enjoying a little beach. That's not happening anymore. And you see there's an arrow there with an exclamation mark and a question mark. On Friday, I went there and there was a rather robust pair of huggy pull-ups. I went there today and it's still there. So that kind of puts a point on the whole floating debris and what structures that stick out into the harbor will do to the rest of the shoreline. This is a familiar view of Lunenburg Harbor. Imagine, this is a little bit of a thought experiment. Imagine Mr. Knopper, his first week on the job, shows up and says, I know what we're going to do to really soup up this World Heritage Site. We're going to put a big old pile of rocks right out into the harbor. And maybe we'll even build a Red Lobster on it. I wanted to point out that once this extension is built, it's going to be a permanent deal. So if it turns out not to be all that great, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to undo.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth.
That was Steve Saunders, a St. Andrews resident and engineer, challenging some of the findings in the Gemtech study presented to St. Andrews Council. He didn't actually get a very good response, or a warm response, at least from Councillor Kurt Gumichel, who made a motion to amend the agenda at the very beginning of that meeting to not allow any presentations. He sort of felt like the talking had been done, the presentations had been made. He didn't really feel like he wanted to hear from anyone else. But, you know, as some of the other councillors said around the table, we can't stifle public engagement and the things that people want to say. And many of them said they appreciated feedback even this late in the process.
Yeah, we saw it go both ways, where there seemed to be some frustration from councillors who said it's just time to vote, we've got to move along with this. And then Councillor Steve Neal, acting deputy mayor Steve Neal, said, look, even if people join late in the game, their opinions are valid, even changing your mind. I think that's one of the issues at play here for some people that we've heard from in the community, is that there's this hesitation to feel that, well, what if I have questions now, even if I voted in this direction 2 years ago? So I think that's the gray area, right? Some people have been following this the whole time and have questions now, and it could be based on feedback they've heard from other people in the community, but it's definitely a very tense time for both council and the community.
Yeah, for sure. And as the meeting progressed, you started to get a better sense of potentially how each councillor was going to vote. It's worth noting that the council has been dealing with this issue over several years. I've heard 7, I've heard 5, but I did a little bit of research yesterday while I was preparing to do the story for television and for online, and this has been through multiple compositions of council, not just this council, but previous councils who have been looking at the idea of the revitalization of Market Square, of fixing the wharf so that it is resilient towards climate change and that it no longer needs to be under a weight restriction, but also lifting Market Square so that it doesn't flood, right? Mm-hmm. Or it doesn't get further impacted by that storm surge that we're starting to see. So it's been a frustrating process because it has taken so long.
Yes, you definitely have heard a lot of frustrations, and coming from people with very different opinions as well. In terms of the Market Square revitalization, there's a lot of talk that potentially this project seems to be Market Square focused and not as much about the wharf as had been previously thought to be the focus of this grant.
Well, exactly. And you'll hear in a few moments from several councillors who provided as much of their rationale as they possibly could. And we're going to include councillors who spoke both for and against this project. But essentially, the timeline of things, wanting to minimize the impact of tourism season, funding that's set to expire in 2026, all part of the picture, but also the environmental impact. There were experts around that council chamber that were saying this is not the right option, and they believe there was another one available to them. But we'll see what the tender comes back as. Let's take a listen to what some of the councillors had to say about why they voted in favor or against the tender process.
Public engagement, I feel, is critical for us as councillors to do our job. Doesn't mean that we always agree or we always agree with everything that we hear, but listening to our residents is critical. I appreciate the questions I receive. I appreciate being stopped on the street and being provided an opinion. I appreciate hearing people's concerns. I think that is critical. But as my councillor, my colleague to the left has indicated, in making a decision, we need to take into account 7 years of discussion and information and consultation. I also feel really comfortable that we as a council are very transparent. All of our meetings are public and streamed live. They are recorded and available to be reviewed afterwards. All of our documentation is on our website, and our website is very accessible. And town staff are very accommodating in terms of trying to assist with people getting information. So I feel very comfortable that we as a council have been transparent. For me, there are a couple of considerations that I think are critical. One is cost. We do have money from the in form of a provincial federal government grant that is significant, because one of the things we do have to take into consideration is the cost of this project and how much can we expect the residents of St. Andrews to bear in terms of increase in taxes. That's a consideration. That's a consideration that we consider at this table, I would say, on a monthly basis or on a bi-weekly basis. That's significant. The other consideration for me that is significant, and I have heard it from our business community, is the length of time that there will be an interruption to the wharf in terms of getting our refurbishment done. Our wharf is an economic driver in our community. We have businesses who rely on it, and as Councillor Gumichel said earlier this evening, our tourist season is a short period of time, and we have many businesses that rely on that very short period of time to make their money. And I feel we have to take that into consideration. One of the things for me around this particular option is that the hope is that we can get it done without interrupting significantly another tourist season. That is a big consideration for me. And the other consideration that I think is important, as Councillor Blanchard has already indicated, this is an opportunity for us to expand the footprint of our market square, which I believe should be the heart of our community. I do not believe it should be a parking lot. I know that's not always popular when we have such a parking crunch in this community.
Again, I will listen to concerns and complaints for, against, it doesn't matter, right up until the last minute. I think it's all valuable. Just because somebody chose to get involved at the last minute, to me, doesn't diminish the comments that come forward. Again, going back to the original survey, and again, my original opposition to this project, typically what I heard in response to that was that this is what everyone wanted. And I've never agreed with that. And again, the survey response, and Councillor Blanchard just pointed it out, it was 38% in favor of this option. It was 71 people that voted in favor of this option. Now, again, there was not a large sample size. I wish it had been much, much bigger, but it was not. But it was still only 71 people. So the fact that as this project moved along, and yes, we have invested hundreds of hours into it, more information comes to light, more people get involved, more people hear about it, and more people start to raise concerns. I'm sure if this survey went out again, we would have a far better response to it, and I really don't think the numbers would be the same. With regards to going back to the drawing board and starting over, I would prefer not to, but quite honestly, being elected to sit here, I accepted that. So if that is what I think is the best option for the public, then I would have been more than willing to do that. Again, I'm not typically the bleeding heart optimist, but I have said it repeatedly. I honestly believe that there is an option available to us that doesn't involve drastically altering our shoreline and changing the aesthetics of historic downtown St. Andrews forever. And I don't debate the idea of having a community gathering area there. I think that is wonderful. I think we already have that, to be honest, if we did eliminate the parking. And the comparisons with St. John and other communities that have done harborfront refurbishment, the one thing that jumps out to me is that none of them have a bordering rock wall that raises up above the gathering spot. That versus standing in Market Square and having, I'm going to say, a meter rock wall in front of you is doing nothing but damaging our downtown, in my opinion. Regardless of what we decide to do to beautify the square, you're still going to be staring out at a rock wall. And that's something that I just can't support. I fully believe that that option is out there, that no, we will never get 100% consensus, but I watch wharfs get repaired all over the province. I spend my whole summer on the water. And to me, that option is available. We just have not found it. If we happen to lose this money, then so be it. There is plenty of other federal grants out there that I'm sure we can tap into. We have people that are willing to help us with that. I just can't go forward with this simply because we have a pot of money that we're about to lose.
That was some of the St. Andrews councillors explaining their rationale for why they voted for or against the process to move forward on the tender. So I guess the only thing is what happens next, right? This process has been hard both on the council but also residents as well, on relationships and things like that. Questions about what Market Square might actually look like, what actually happens to the wharf, are they going to pave it? Are they going to leave it as gravel? Like, there's so many questions that are still up in the air. Some of those questions were asked at the meeting, but I don't know that anyone has a lot of answers at the moment. And we're going to continue to follow this story, and we're going to continue to look into the things that have been brought to our attention.
Yeah, I did. I had the chance to go outside in the meeting. I know that you were still inside following the council meeting. I wanted to catch a few of the residents who had come out to the meeting when they left after the decision was made. Some didn't stick around for the rest of the meeting. And, you know, it was great. It was great to catch up with Steve Saunders, who was with Roger McNabb outside. They're both members of the Kiwanis Club here in town. They are both members of the Yacht Club. And they are on opposite sides of this issue, but still friends, still even did the interview together. And I thought, you know, that was a great representation of two residents who are handling this while maintaining their friendships.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a little bit of a loss of capacity to disagree in this process. You'll hear the mayor a little bit later on say, you know, we've pleased as many people as we can and as many councillors as we can, but no one is going to be 100% happy with the process. Although, you know, there could be an option down the road if this doesn't work out that maybe suits a little bit more needs that were addressed in this process.
It's Market Square, it's the wharf, it is that centerpiece of town. So no matter what happens, there definitely will be people with different views on what goes ahead.
Let's take a listen to interviews with Steve Saunders and Roger McNabb, as well as Acting Mayor Kate Akagi on the next steps for the wharf.
I wanted to point out that once this extension is built, it's going to be a permanent deal. So if it turns out not to be all that great, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to undo. So it shouldn't be something that should be rushed into.
And what was your feeling after hearing the outcome of the vote tonight?
Well, it seemed like quite a few of the councillors more or less were embedded with where they were going. I wasn't going to be able to change them. So they came in knowing already how they were going to vote.
And interesting to point out for people at home, you're both members of the St. Andrews Yacht Club, friends. But Roger, what was your reaction to the decision made tonight?
Well, the decision made tonight, I'm very proud of the council. They've been working on this for a long time, for a project, and they've gotten as much information as they could possibly get a hold of, even right up to and including tonight. And they have to make a decision for the citizens of St. Andrews. They made a decision, and now we're going to see what comes out of that.
I am more than pleased. Our council supported everything that we've gone for, and we tend to disagree, but we go out of here friends. We discussed it. We gave everybody the opportunity. I feel that's very important, that we hear the side of the people.
One of the last comments from one of the speakers suggested that there might be some legal action, so it might kind of suggest that this isn't over yet. What's your take on that?
I don't know how there can be legal action when we've done our due diligence. We've been very clear and transparent about everything that's gone on with council and outside of council, but really we've done nothing outside of council. We've done it in council, and we've been more than transparent than most councils. I think we give the opinion we want to hear, and as you heard tonight from a lot of our councils, a lot of times you wouldn't be allowed to do this, and we opted to allow them to do this because we are a council that's willing to hear, pro or con. We want to hear what your opinion is. New or late, we want to hear that opinion.
Do you think this is like a cautionary tale in the public participating in public consultation? Like what I was hearing is that there wasn't many people who came out to the public consultations, maybe, and now after the fact they're sort of coming now and saying these things, or the timeline is different. Do you think this is like kind of like a lesson in why you should participate in public consultation and council meetings and things of that nature?
I think when you hear that, I was at those consultations and a lot more people came out than we expected. We held one at the Anglican Church. I mean, the pews were pretty full. And we held one at the Bayside Hall, and it was full. Not full, but I mean, there were more people than there had ever been before. Because I've gone out there for consultations, and there's been 4 people, and that included us. It wasn't a big showing. But these consultations, we put out there, and a lot of people did turn out to ask questions. But this group of people say they didn't hear it or whatever. And as Councillor Blanchard said, we did the due diligence of putting it out in the wards. We don't call them the wards because we're all part of the municipality of the town of St. Andrews. We're all going to benefit from the wharf. We all are. And, so we all need to be on board, or we all need, most of us, we're never going to please everybody. Oh, sorry. We're never going to please everybody all the time. So we're pleasing as many people as we can. We're pleasing as many councillors as we can because we're not all on board. But when we walk out that door, we're still friends, which I like very much, is that we're a group that works together for the municipality of St. Andrews, not just the little town, for the whole municipality.
further to the questions of where this goes from here, there was discussion of another vote once the tender comes back and the potential for future public presentations. Where does the process go from here?
Well, when we get the tender back, we make the decision as to which tender is accepted. If it's over our price line, we won't be doing it, right? So all of those factor in. But then there will be another public consultation on what's going to happen. So that's where, we will need to do a bit more consultation. But we'll have the tender that we'll be able to put out to the people and say, this is the price that came in, this is what's going to be done, this is what we can afford. That's what we're going to be looking at.
To what?
I believe so. Is that correct? You're listening? Okay.
To what level do you think that the Market Square, and when you say more public consultation, the reference was that was for the Market Square public space. To what extent do you think that will encapsulate some of the issues that were brought up here? Do you think that that will be almost the table for that discussion more than this the wharf itself?
Well, again, I want to reiterate that the Market Square is not going to be a parking lot. None of the councillors want it to be a parking lot. We want it to be a vibrant center, as they said for other of the municipalities that have done that, like St. John, Lunenburg, for example. I mean, they're, wherever you want to go, Bar Harbor, there's always a section where things happen, like events happen. And that's what we want for our town, is to have an area where we can have those events and bring more people to town. Mind you, Canada Day is over the top with people. We still want the other events, the shoulder events, to have that opportunity.
That was Steve Saunders, Roger McNabb, and Acting Mayor Kate Akagi. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll be discussing proactive measures taken by the St. Andrews Business Improvement Association to make events in the town a little bit safer.
These barriers act as a deterrent, like a physical deterrent, but also a psychological deterrent to prevent any sort of tragic thing from happening.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth. We are going to take a look now at an initiative by the St. Andrews BIA, the Business Improvement Association, that's looking to make events a little safer in the community. Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, so I got this idea after I went to a regular council meeting in St. Andrews, and they had a motion to support the BIA through the purchase of 52 water-filled barricades, which are essentially large barricades. Each one will weigh about 1,100 pounds that they're going to use to block off Water Street. And anyone who's been here or lives here knows that some of the events on Water Street draw hundreds of people. And so they wanted to do this because over the last several years, we've noticed or seen a trend in the use of vehicles to attack either festivals or events, and the most recent one would have been the Lapu Lapu Day Festival in Vancouver. There was an incident on New Year's Eve in New Orleans in the United States. So there's an ongoing effort of trying to make events like these safer so that people can't just drive through groups of people.
Okay, so these barricades that you speak of, you fill them with water, and that's what creates this 1,100-pound barricade.
Yeah, so essentially you fill them up with water. They can be drained afterwards and moved afterwards. And essentially they reached out to the town to match the funding through a grant they received from the provincial BIA association, the one that oversees all of the BIAs in New Brunswick, called Downtown New Brunswick. They got $20,000. They asked the council to match that funding. Council unanimously approved that, but they also asked for the help of Public Works to manage those barricades, fill them up, move them around, that sort of thing. It will be interesting to see, and they're hoping to use them for Indulge, which happens in October.
Okay, I know these are not always fun things to have to think about, but nevertheless, they can play a pretty important role in just making people feel like there are protections in place. I know we don't want to think about the possibility of things like this happening, especially in our corner of the world, which always feels so safe, but a proactive measure can, you never know if they work, because hopefully it just stays a safe community.
Take a listen to our interview with Katie McDonald, the Secretary of the St. Andrews Business Improvement Association.
More and more, unfortunately, over the past few years, we've seen vehicles used to deliberately attack pedestrians. And so with that in mind, the BIA, which is a local business organization, has partnered with the town of St. Andrews to purchase these water-fillable barriers that can be set up during events like Canada Day or Indulge Festival when the streets are open to pedestrians. And so these barriers act as a deterrent, like a physical deterrent, but also a psychological deterrent to prevent any sort of tragic thing from happening. And I think that, we don't like to think that something like that could happen in our little town, but the reality is it could happen anywhere. So this is just a small proactive thing that we can do to prevent something like that from happening. But the next big festival is Indulge Festival, where we shut down the street and people can have fun and pedestrians are open to walk through the street. So that would be the next event where hopefully we will have these things in place, and it will be, we'll probably never know if this will prevent something from happening, but we can live with that. What we can't live with is something happening and knowing that we didn't take any proactive measures. So hopefully we'll have them in place by then.
This is a logistical question. How many barriers do you want? I think 53, I think was the number I heard.
Yes, I believe it's 53, which is a good number. They can be used for multiple things, which is great, but that should be enough to block all the main roadways that need to be blocked off to provide safety.
And you talked about it's a psychological deterrent, but do you think it also gives peace of mind, both to businesses and people who are going to be traveling on the street?
Yeah, I think so. When I've seen news stories where something tragic has happened, I immediately think of, my hometown and what that would be like, how devastating it would be. So something like that would give me peace of mind. It would make me feel more safe, I think, during those events, and so you can enjoy the events that we love more.
That was Katie McDonald, the Secretary of the St. Andrews Business Improvement Association, speaking about new barricades the association has purchased to make events on Water Street more safe. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll discuss the removal of donation bins from municipal properties in St. Stephen and the cancellation of the St. Stephen side of the homecoming parade.
Yeah, we started realizing that however the bins have shown up over the many years, I think there was a lot of verbal approvals perhaps over time.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
We're now heading over to St. Stephen, where there was also a council meeting this week.
Yes, exactly. So they had a committee of the whole on July 16th, and then they had another council meeting on the 30th, so very close together. But they did make a decision about something that had been brought to committee of the whole, something a little bit more urgent in terms of their timeline. They want to remove clothing donation bins from municipal property. So you might have heard us talk about a growing number of people who are homeless in the community. And so what's essentially happening, if you listen carefully to what the councillors have said, people are climbing inside. And they're climbing inside for one of two reasons. They want something inside it, or they're getting in it to shelter themselves from the elements. And this is particularly dangerous in the winter. So council had a discussion about these clothing bins and what they could do with those bins. And they weren't able to find any formal agreements.
Obviously, it speaks to a sad reality for our community as well, that this is a place we're at in time where people are looking to clothing bins as a place of shelter.
Right, and the other thing is, I'm sure you have driven by, I've certainly driven by locations where clothing bins have had, their donations are just kind of strewn about. They're kind of all over the place, or they're half hanging out because someone has gone through it and left them there. These are issues that are not common or just unique to St. Stephen. It happens everywhere, and it's not the fault of the charity organizations either. This is an individual problem, but I do recognize that they wanted to get those out of there, so they have done that. and they're going to have them removed by September 30th.
And I know that anyone who has followed St. Stephen Council with us for a number of years, the mayor declared a state of emergency over homelessness just a few years back. So this is definitely a crisis in the area, something that is mirrored all around the world, but definitely something for Charlotte County. The numbers that we've seen over the last few years have been quite high, and there's always these sad extra stories that go along with the territory when you're looking at things like putting shelters in the community. You also cover stories like this that maybe initially you don't think of will be something that comes to light, but also another really troubling representation of the moment in time we're in when it comes to homelessness and also the housing crisis.
And it's worth noting, I did a fairly lengthy story about the community safety survey that was commissioned by the Municipal District of St. Stephen through the Canadian Centre for Safer Communities about the perception of crime. And I really want to emphasize perception. Because what they're measuring is what people think is happening, what they see around them, what they're observing. And so it's a very interesting story. I spoke to an expert in addictions and mental health and homelessness and housing who uses lived experience to impart his research and things like that. So it's a very interesting story, and I would encourage folks to go read that if they're interested in learning more about what's going on.
Okay, well, we will continue to follow this story. Also in St. Stephen, another announcement that came out of the meeting on Wednesday night is that when it comes to International Homecoming Festival, this is something that's been happening in the border community for over half a century. It's this special festival that happens every year that unites Calais and St. Stephen, these two border towns that are really, like, in a lot of ways, one community. We do see that St. Croix River as our border, but truthfully, I mean, we've just crossed back and forth so often that they do feel like neighbors, even if we are different countries.
Yeah, I mean, essentially the statement from the committee, the International Homecoming Committee, is that on the St. Stephen side of the border, there wasn't enough participation in the parade. And so they've decided to cancel just the parade section of the activities. Yeah, the parade will still happen on the Calais side of the border. So if you have a passport, maybe go on over and see if you feel comfortable doing that, if that's something that you want to do and feel comfortable doing, emphasize on feel comfortable doing. The other thing is that I did speak with the Municipal District of St. Stephen. It's not going to be nothing happening during that time frame. They're working on some stuff, so people will be able to engage in the homecoming festivities.
So more of a street for this year. And I know that they talked about the fact that there were less people that were registering in the parade on the Canadian side, but I think that also speaks to the moment. I know that in terms of the Christmas parade, there were around 55 entries. So it's not for a lack of creativity and community engagement in our area, because definitely at Christmas it was quite a show in St. Stephen. But I think it speaks to a lot of things. Sure, yes, summer is a busier time, but this moment in time we're living in with the trade war, Canadians have been very much reuniting, but there's also a lot of uneasiness that we are seeing, especially of Canadians crossing the border. And as we've seen with national data as well, travel is down across the country going into the U.S. So this isn't unique to New Brunswick. This is across the country. And if anything, I think New Brunswickers have crossed a bit more in terms of those border town neighborhoods in Maine that really feel like part of our community as well.
Yeah, the other thing is that the committee has been reaching out, according to their statement, for months to local businesses, organizations to participate in this parade, and unfortunately there was a lack of participation, and that's just the reality of the situation. So we're excited for homecoming festivities, and we're going to try to get down there and see what's going on.
I'm a little heartbroken because I've always had a fun time watching on the Calais side. It's neat to watch the parade cross the border and be in another country, to see the parade that may have started in your country. It's quite special to see the mayors ride together. So I'm a little heartbroken. I know that Councillor Rodas expressed this too. Growing up in St. Stephen, she said this is just a part of our lives. This is something we all look forward to. And there was also, I think, a lot of fear expressed in the meeting of, if we do make this move now, will this affect long-term plans? Can we call it off for this year? And I think that some of the feedback from the border was that it could be more complicated if they end this this year to go ahead with bringing it back in years ahead.
Yeah, unfortunately, that could be a possibility. I think the staff at the Municipal District of St. Stephen work very hard to make the community an inviting space and to have events. And so we send our appreciation to them for their hard work and dedication.
Yeah.
looking ahead now, we're going to look at a few things that are on the agenda. I'm going to have some more wharf stories because I haven't gotten enough of it yet. And we're going to do some deeper dives and look at some things that have been part of the process about the design work, all of that information. And I'm very excited to do that work.
Yes, I'm sure council is getting tons of emails the same way we are here. After decisions like that's made, you tend to hear a lot from the community. So if we haven't gotten back to you, if you've sent an email or a message our way, we will get to it, but definitely a lot of feedback from the community already. So I know that you are on top of that. So I don't envy your workload right now, but it's quite extensive when you cover a topic like this that has been ongoing for a number of years, and you're waiting it as we follow it into the year ahead, which will be the major point in this project.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is you have to try to remember all of the things that have happened. I mean, this process has been ongoing since 2023, even before my existence here at the Courier and CHCO-TV, not before my existence as a journalist, but certainly in Charlotte County. So, and fitting all of that information into a condensed article is sometimes very, very difficult. The one I wrote last night was 1,100 words. I'm sorry if you're reading it, but you want to keep it to a certain length that people aren't going to get bored. They want to read to the end. So I'm doing my very, very best to bring all the information that's valuable and that informs people's decisions and decision makers as well.
But nevertheless, every time you touch on the subject, there's so much backstory to reiterate. I remember even thinking earlier in this show, oh, did I mention that if the grant expires in May 2026 and the project's not complete, then that's problematic for the grant as well. So many details to remember at all times that factor into all the decisions being made. So again, I don't envy you having to tackle this subject because it's complex, ongoing, multi-year, but I will be following and enjoying reading what you put out there.
I'm a wharf expert now. It's where you got questions, I have answers. But we also have some festivals that are coming up across Charlotte County. So you're going to be participating, I think, in some of them.
Yes, if you are the wharf expert, lighthouses are my thing, and I am very excited to be going to Greens Point Lighthouse for the annual picnic this week. Michael Strong is the lightkeeper there. He's just a fabulous person. Flo and I have been out a bunch of times to see the lighthouse. We've had a tour before from Michael, so I'm looking forward to getting out there in the summer months. I think my last tour was in January. So I can look forward to just sitting on the grass this time and taking in the view. And then I'll be heading to Deer Island for what I believe, and I know Islanders will correct me if I'm wrong, I believe this is the first comedy fest on the island. It is Sunday. There will be a food truck at the event. It's at the Point, and how cool! Like comedy on the island. So yeah, I get to have a fun weekend ahead.
A reminder to everybody: you have to get on a boat to get there. Just so you're aware. But yeah, that's totally exciting. I wonder if Deer Islanders are funny.
We're going to find out. I have a feeling because Flo is from Deer Island, and Flo, great comic relief around here. So I have a feeling maybe it is in the blood over on the island. So it'll be a fun time. What are you up to going ahead? Just wharf stuff.
Wharf stuff. I've got a bunch of things from St. Stephen Council I'm going to try to write about. There's some things that I'm looking into in Eastern Charlotte as well. So there's lots on the agenda. I'm never not busy. So you never have to worry about me not doing any work. That's for sure.
Thank you for joining us on This Week Uncut. We'll see you next week. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.